"Security, get this man off HOA property." That was what Victoria Harlan said while standing in front of 15 brand new commercial buildings, every one of them sitting on my land. Behind her, hundreds of Cedar Ridge residents were waiting for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Local reporters had their cameras pointed at the stage. Business owners stood beside locked storefronts, holding keys to offices and shops they believed they would open that morning. Victoria looked at me like I was a confused old man who had wandered into the wrong event. "You lost this argument 18 months ago," she said. "This development belongs to Cedar Ridge." I didn't argue. I carried my father's wooden document box to the registration table, opened it, and pulled out the original recorded deed. Then 3 county vehicles turned into the parking lot. A sheriff's cruiser followed them. The smile disappeared from Victoria's face when the county building officer unfolded a certified survey showing the same thing my deed had said all along. The HOA didn't own the entrance road, it didn't own the parking lots, and it didn't own 1 square foot beneath those 15 buildings, but the deed wasn't the document that destroyed Victoria. The document that did, that carried my forged signature, and someone had used it to obtain every construction permit on the property. To understand why I let them finish, we need to go back 18 months to the morning I found bulldozers tearing down my father's fence. My name is Samuel Mercer. Most people around Cedar Ridge knew me as the older man with the faded Ford pickup. Muddy work boots and 22 acres of grass they assumed I had forgotten about. What they didn't know was that I had spent 34 years working as a civil survey technician. I knew how to read legal descriptions, recover buried boundary monuments, compare recorded plats, and tell the difference between a real property line and a colored line somebody added to a sales presentation. The land beside Cedar Ridge had belonged to my family since my grandfather purchased it in 1946. My father raised cattle there before the highway brought subdivisions, golf courses, and million-dollar houses into the valley. When the original Cedar Ridge developer arrived in the late 1970s, he bought hundreds of acres surrounding us. My father refused to sell. He insisted that the Mercer land remain outside the subdivision. No HOA authority, no shared amenities, no community easements, just 22 acres of private property with its own parcel number, tax record, and recorded deed. After my father died, the land passed to me. My wife, Evelyn, used to stand near the eastern field and talk about building a vocational training center there. She believed young people should have a place to learn carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, and construction skills without taking on a mountain of debt. We never got the chance to build it together. Evelyn died from cancer 4 years before Victoria Harlan became president of the Cedar Ridge HOA. After that, I kept the land mostly untouched, not because it was abandoned. Because I wasn't ready to change the last place where I could still hear my wife describing the building she wanted. Victoria saw something different. She saw 22 undeveloped acres sitting between Cedar Ridge and the highway. In HOA newsletters, she began calling it an underutilized tract. A few months later, it became an economic opportunity. By the following spring, she was showing residents glossy renderings of something called Cedar Ridge Marketplace. 15 commercial buildings, restaurants, medical offices, boutique stores, a fitness center. The illustration even showed a landscaped walking path running across the exact spot where my father's equipment shed stood. No one had called me. No one had offered to buy the land. No one had asked permission. The first time I realized the project had moved beyond a presentation was at 6:30 on a Monday morning. I heard diesel engines from my kitchen. When I reached the field, 2 sections of my father's cedar fence were already lying in the dirt. A bulldozer was pushing through the opening. Pink survey flags stretched across the grass, and a large sign had been planted beside the road. Future home of Cedar Ridge Marketplace. Victoria stood near the construction trailer in a white blazer and dark sunglasses, holding a clipboard against her chest. Beside her were a site engineer, a general contractor, and 2 HOA board members. I walked toward them and pointed at the broken fence. "Who authorized this?" Victoria turned slowly, as though I had interrupted a private meeting. "This property is part of Cedar Ridge's approved commercial expansion." "No," I said. "It is T." She opened a folder and showed me a polished master plan. My land had been colored pale blue and labeled Future Community Commercial. There was no county recording stamp, no parcel number, no legal description. It was a marketing illustration. Not a property record. I looked at Victoria. Show me the recorded deed where my father transferred this land. Her smile tightened. You relying on outdated paperwork, Mr. Mercer. The county approved this project. That wasn't my question. The contractor glanced at her. Victoria stepped closer and lowered her voice. This development will create jobs, raise property values, and benefit hundreds of families. You cannot stop community progress because of a technical boundary dispute. Then she looked at my old truck and worn boots. You should speak with our attorney. Perhaps the association can offer you something reasonable. That was when I understood what she believed. She didn't necessarily think the land belonged to her. She thought I was too old. Too alone, and too poor to prove that it didn't. I looked past her at the bulldozers sitting inside my property line. Then I took out my phone and photographed the broken fence. The machinery, the project sign, and every person standing there. Victoria laughed. Take all the pictures you want. I nodded. I intend to. That afternoon I opened the fireproof box in my study and removed my father's deed. The next morning, 5 certified warning letters went into the mail. They were addressed to the HOA board, the developer, the general contractor, the county permit office, and Cedar Ridge attorney. Each envelope contained the same records: a certified copy of my deed, the current property tax record showing my name and parcel number, a copy of the original subdivision plat, and a written demand that construction stop until ownership and boundary records could be verified. I wasn't asking anyone to take my word for it. I was giving them the public records. The contractor signed for his letter on Tuesday morning. The HOA office received theirs 20 minutes later. By Thursday, I had delivery confirmation from every recipient. Victoria answered first. Her response came on expensive letterhead from an attorney named Douglas Crane. The letter accused me of interfering with an approved development, harassing contractors, and making fraudulent claims against HOA property. It warned that Cedar Ridge would hold me personally responsible for any construction delays. At the bottom, in bold letters, it said, "Cease all contact with project personnel." Rachel Cole read the letter twice before setting it on her desk. Rachel had handled boundary disputes and construction claims for more than 20 years. She was practical, direct, and unimpressed by expensive stationery. They didn't answer your deed, she said. No, they didn't produce a deed of their own. No, they threatened you instead. That's about the size of it. Rachel leaned back. That usually means one of two things. Either they haven't checked the title, or they checked it and didn't like what they found. The next morning, Cedar Ridge emailed every homeowner. Victoria described me as an adjacent resident trying to obstruct a community project for personal gain. She claimed I had waited until construction began before raising an ownership dispute. That was false. My certified letters had arrived before the first foundation was poured. But Victoria didn't need the residents to know the truth. She needed them to see me as the problem before they discovered she had built a commercial project on land the HOA did not own. Construction continued. Within a week, the bulldozers reached my father's equipment shed. I arrived just in time to watch an excavator tear through the roof. The shed wasn't valuable. The wood was weathered. One wall leaned slightly east. The doors hadn't closed properly in years. But my father had built it himself. His initials were still carved into the workbench inside. I stood beside the road and recorded the demolition from a safe distance. Victoria saw me from the construction trailer and walked over with her clipboard beneath one arm. You were instructed not to interfere. I am standing on my land. This is an active construction zone. Then you should move it, she smiled. The board has reviewed your documents. Your claim has no merit. Who reviewed them? Our legal team. Then send me the deed they relied on. Her expression hardened. You don't dictate terms to this association. I looked past her as the excavator crushed what remained of the shed. I'm not dictating anything. I'm documenting it that afternoon. I called the county permit office and asked which ownership record had been submitted with the project application. The woman on the phone placed me on hold for nearly 10 minutes. When she returned, her voice had changed. Mr. Mercer, the file includes an owner authorization form. Signed by whom? Samuel Mercer. For a moment, I said nothing. I never signed an authorization. She lowered her voice. Then you need to come see this in person. The next morning, Rachel and I stood at the county records counter while a clerk placed the permit file between us. The form had my full legal name typed across the top. Below it was a signature meant to look like mine, but whoever copied it had made a mistake. For more than 30 years, I had signed Samuel J. Mercer with an open capital M. The signature on the form used a closed loop. It was my name, it was not my hand. The contact address beneath the signature didn't lead to my house. It led to Cedar Ridge Property Management. Rachel photographed every page. Then she looked at me. This is no longer just a boundary dispute. The authorization had been used to support permit applications for all 15 buildings. Someone had not merely ignored my deed. Someone had created a document pretending I had agreed. Rachel closed the file. From this moment forward, you do not enter that construction site. You do not confront their workers. You do not touch a fence, a machine, or a survey stake. So I just let them continue. You warned them repeatedly. Every foundation they pour after receiving those letters proves they chose to continue with notice. I looked through the county office window toward the highway. Steel framing was already rising above my field. Victoria believed every dollar spent made her claims stronger and mine weaker. Rachel saw it differently. Let them keep making evidence, she said. So I went home, cleared a shelf in my study, and placed a new binder on it. On the spine, I wrote 2 words. Cedar Ridge. 3 weeks later, the first 6 foundations were in place. I drove to the edge of the property just after sunrise and parked beside the county road. I stayed outside the temporary construction fence and photographed the concrete pads. Utility trenches and steel deliveries. Victoria arrived in her white SUV before I finished. She stepped out with her phone already in her hand. You were told to stay away from this site. I am standing beside a public road. You re-intimidating my contractors. None of the workers were even looking at us. I raised my camera and photographed the nearest foundation. Victoria turned away and called the sheriff. She told the dispatcher I was trespassing, threatening workers, and attempting to sabotage construction equipment. I didn't interrupt her. 20 minutes later, Deputy Aaron Mills pulled onto the shoulder. Victoria met him before he reached me. She handed him the glossy site plan and spoke quickly, pointing toward me as though I had been caught climbing the fence. This man has been repeatedly warned. He is disrupting an authorized HOA project. Deputy Mills looked at me. Mr. Mercer, do you have identification? I handed him my license, a copy of my deed, and the latest property tax receipt. Victoria laughed. He carries that outdated deed everywhere as if it overrides county approval. Deputy Mills studied both sets of documents. I can determine ownership on the roadside, he said. That is a civil matter. Victoria folded her arms. There is no ownership dispute. The buildings are already going up. My warnings were delivered before the first foundation. I said. Her eyes moved toward the body camera on his chest, but she kept talking. It doesn't matter what his deed says, once all 15 buildings are finished. No court is going to destroy a multi-million-dollar development over an old boundary claim. Deputy Mills stopped writing. Ma'am, are you saying you knew he was claiming ownership before construction continued? Victoria hesitated. I'm saying his claim has no merit. That wasn't my question. For the first time, she looked uncertain. The deputy instructed both of us to avoid confrontation and documented the incident. No one was arrested. No machinery was stopped. To Victoria, that meant she had won. By the following morning, concrete trucks were back on the property. 6 foundations became 9. 9 became 12. At every HOA meeting, Victoria announced that the Mercer issue had been resolved. I requested copies of the meeting minutes and placed them in my binder. Then, Deputy Mills sent me the incident report and body camera preservation number. Victoria had called the sheriff to make me look dangerous instead. She had recorded herself admitting that she knew about my deed and intended to finish the buildings before anyone could stop her. The next piece of evidence had been sitting in the county archives for nearly 50 years. Rachel and I met Ellen Price, the deputy county clerk, in a records room beneath the courthouse. Ellen rolled a large document across the table and placed weights on each corner. This is the original Cedar Ridge subdivision plat, she said. The map had been recorded in 1978 when the first developer began buying farmland around my father's property. Cedar Ridge appeared as numbered lots. Roads, drainage easements, and common areas. But in the center of the map was an empty rectangle covering 22 acres. Across it, in block letters, were the words, Mercer Reserve, not a part of this subdivision. Rachel looked at Ellen. Is there a later plat bringing this parcel into Cedar Ridge? Ellen shook her head. No annexation, no transfer deed, no recorded amendment, nothing. She produced the chain of title. My grandfather had purchased the land in 1946. It passed to my father, then it passed to me. Every transfer had been recorded. Every property tax payment was current. Not one document granted Cedar Ridge any ownership interest. The glossy master plan Victoria carried around wasn't a legal record. It was a sales illustration, but Rachel wanted more than historical paperwork. She wanted the boundary located on the ground. That was when we hired Marcus Lee. Marcus was a licensed surveyor who had worked on highway expansions, utility corridors, and commercial developments throughout the county. He began with the legal description in my deed. From there, he recovered 2 buried iron pins, an old stone monument, and the remains of the western fence line shown in aerial photographs from the 1970s. 3 days later, he returned with a sealed survey. He placed the county parcel map over the marketplace construction plan. The result was worse than any of us expected. The boundary didn't pass through one corner of the project. It surrounded the entire thing. All 15 commercial buildings were inside my parcel, so were both parking lots, the entrance road, the loading area, most of the landscaping. Even the utility trench crossed my land without a recorded easement. Marcus enlarged the overlay and traced the boundary in red. Rachel stared at it. They didn't accidentally cross a property line, she said. They built an entire development on the wrong side of it. I pointed to the parcel number printed on the construction plan. How did the county system miss this? Ellen compared the application with my tax record. Then she noticed it. The parcel number listed on the permits differed from mine by a single digit. That number belonged to a narrow strip of HOA property beside the entrance. Someone had attached 15 buildings to a parcel barely wide enough to hold a road. It was the kind of mistake that could happen once, but not across every application, utility request. Site plan and inspection form. This wasn't overlooked, Rachel said. Someone made sure the county was looking at the wrong land. 2 days later, we learned exactly who had given that instruction. His name was Tom Alvarez. Tom had been the project superintendent during the first 4 months of construction. He had supervised the grading crews, concrete deliveries, and utility work before Victoria suddenly replaced him. He called me from a number. I didn't recognize Mr. Mercer. I think I have something you need to see. We met the next morning at a diner 2 towns away. Tom arrived carrying a black contractor's case. He waited until we were seated in a back corner before opening it. Inside were printed emails, field reports, photographs, and a preliminary title review. The title report was dated 6 weeks before the first bulldozer entered my land. One paragraph had been highlighted. Ownership of the proposed development tract could not be verified. Mercer Reserve appeared as a separately owned parcel not included in Cedar Ridge. Tom said he had forwarded the warning to Victoria, the developer, and the HOA attorney. What did she say? Rachel asked. Tom removed an email. Victoria's reply was only 4 sentences long. The final sentence read, "Proceed with construction. Once the project is operational, Mercer will have no practical remedy except a negotiated settlement." There it was. She hadn't misunderstood the records. She had seen the title warning before construction began. Her plan was to build so much, spend so much, and involve so many businesses that everyone would pressure me to accept whatever amount she offered. Tom had refused to sign a field report stating that the property boundaries had been independently verified. 3 days later, he was removed from the project before leaving. He had saved copies of the correspondence and photographed the original boundary stakes. The photographs showed Victoria standing beside those stakes with the site engineer. 2 weeks later, the markers disappeared. Rachel placed the photographs beside Marcus's survey. They knew where the line was. Tom nodded. They moved the markers before the grading crew came through. The construction records revealed something else. The company receiving the project management fees was Harlan Development Services. Its registered owner was Victoria's younger brother. Another company had been promised control of the 2 most valuable buildings, the medical center and the fitness complex. That company used a mailing address connected to Victoria herself. The marketplace wasn't only about jobs, growth, or property values. Victoria expected to collect fees during construction and profit from the buildings afterward. She had also used HOA reserve funds to help guarantee a project built on land she knew the HOA did not own. The deed explained what she had taken. The invoices explained why. Rachel copied every document and sent preservation notices to the HOA, the developer, the lender, and their insurance companies. By the end of the week, Victoria knew Tom had spoken to us. Her response arrived the following Monday. Cedar Ridge filed an emergency lawsuit accusing me of watching in silence while millions of dollars were invested. They claimed that because I had not physically stopped construction, I had effectively accepted it. Victoria was asking the court to give the HOA control of my land not because they owned it, but because taking it had become expensive. The emergency hearing took place 9 days later. Victoria arrived with 3 attorneys, 2 HOA board members, and a stack of architectural renderings showing the marketplace filled with shoppers. Her attorney argued that Cedar Ridge had invested millions in good faith. He said, I had watched construction continue without obtaining an immediate injunction. He described the 15 buildings as an irreversible community investment and suggested that removing them would harm residents, tenants, and local businesses. Then he said the sentence Victoria had been building toward from the beginning. The practical solution is to grant the association continued control of the property and compensate Mr. Mercer based on its previous undeveloped value. In other words, they wanted the court to reward them for building quickly enough on land they did not own. Rachel stood and placed 3 certified mail receipts on the evidence table. These warnings were delivered before the first foundation was poured. Then came my deed, the recorded plat, the tax records, Marcus sealed survey, the forged authorization, the body camera transcript. Finally, Rachel presented Tom's email. Proceed with construction once the project is operational. Mercer will have no practical remedy except a negotiated settlement. The courtroom went quiet. The judge looked toward Victoria. You were aware of Mr. Mercer's ownership claim before construction continued. Victoria leaned toward her attorney. He answered. For her, the association believed the claim lacked merit. The judge tapped the certified warnings. Belief is not good faith when you refuse to investigate public records contradicting your position. He did not issue a final ownership ruling that morning. That would require a longer proceeding, but he issued immediate orders. No business could occupy the buildings, no certificate of occupancy could be issued, no new lease could be signed. The HOA, developer, and property manager had to preserve every email, permit record, invoice, and electronic device connected to the project. The county was ordered to audit the permit chain. Outside the courthouse, Victoria told reporters the ruling was only a temporary administrative delay. Then she announced that the ribbon-cutting ceremony would proceed as scheduled. She claimed the event would demonstrate community confidence and encouraged the county to resolve the situation quickly. Rachel watched the interview on her phone. She still thinks the size of the crowd gives her ownership. I looked at the date beneath Victoria's announcement. The ceremony was 10 days away. Then we should help her fill the parking lot. Over the next week, Rachel sent certified copies of our evidence to the county building department. The construction lender, the title insurer, the HOA's insurance carrier, and the attorneys representing the future tenants. Marcus received permission to restore the boundary markers. Orange survey flags appeared beside the entrance, along the sidewalks, and behind every completed building. Victoria ordered workers to hide them with landscaping fabric. Marcus photographed that too. The night before the ceremony, I carried my father's wooden document box to the marketplace. I set up a folding table beside the registration area. On it, I placed the original deed. The certified plat, Marcus enlarged survey, the warning letters, and the permit carrying the signature I had never written. A small sign stood in front of them, property records. Victoria arrived early the next morning. She looked at the table, then at me. Nobody cares about your old papers anymore. I closed the document box. That's what you've been counting on. By 9 o'clock, residents filled the parking lot. Reporters aimed their cameras at the stage. Future tenants stood beside their locked storefronts. Victoria stepped behind the microphone with ceremonial scissors in her hand. And just as she lifted them toward the ribbon, 3 county vehicles turned through the main gate. A sheriff's cruiser followed. Victoria paused. Only for a second, then she raised the microphone and smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is simply a routine inspection. Cedar Ridge Marketplace will open as planned. The county building officer walked directly toward the stage. No, ma'am. It will not. Two inspectors moved toward the storefronts carrying red notices. Victoria lowered the microphone. You cannot shut down a completed development. We are not shutting down an operating development. The officer said. These buildings were never cleared to open. Victoria pointed toward me. This man is making a fraudulent ownership claim. That was when I opened my father's wooden box. I removed the original recorded deed and placed it on the table. This land passed from my grandfather to my father, and from my father to me. It has never belonged to Cedar Ridge. Ellen unfolded the certified subdivision plat. Across the 22-acre tract were the words, Mercer Reserve, not a part of this subdivision. Then Marcus opened the enlarged survey. The red boundary surrounded the entrance road, both parking lots and all 15 buildings. The crowd went silent. One of the future tenants stepped forward. You told us the HOA owned this property. Victoria ignored him. She turned to the sheriff's deputy. Remove Mercer, he's disrupting a private event. The deputy did not move. Mr. Mercer appears to be standing on property recorded in his name. Rachel placed the certified warning letters beside the deed. These were delivered before the first foundation was poured. Then she placed Tom's email on top. Proceed with construction. Once the project is operational, Mercer will have no practical remedy except a negotiated settlement. Tom stepped out of the crowd. I warned her. The title was defective. She ordered us to continue. The color disappeared from Victoria's face. She blamed the contractor. Then the county officer produced the owner authorization form. Did Mr. Mercer sign this? No, I said. That is my name. It is not my signature, the sheriff asked Victoria, who had submitted it. For the first time that morning, she had nothing to say. Inspectors began placing red notices across the glass doors. The construction lender froze the remaining funds. The title insurer refused to cover the leases. The HOA's insurance carrier opened an investigation because Victoria had continued construction after receiving formal notice. The ribbon remained uncut. Months later, the court confirmed what the deed had shown from the beginning. The land was mine. The investigation found evidence of fraudulent permitting, misuse of HOA funds, undisclosed financial conflicts, and the deliberate submission of inaccurate property information. Victoria was removed from the board. The developer faced a choice. It could demolish the buildings and restore my land, or transfer the improvements as part of a settlement. They chose the settlement. The legitimate business owners had been misled too. So I allowed them to negotiate new leases under valid agreements. 3 of the buildings became the Evelyn Mercer Trade Center. Young people from the county began learning carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, surveying, and construction safety in the same field where Evelyn had once described her dream. Another building became a property record resource office where homeowners could get help understanding deeds, easements, surveys, and HOA boundaries. The new Cedar Ridge Board adopted conflict of interest rules and ordered an independent audit of its property records. Victoria believed 15 completed buildings would make her claim too expensive to challenge. She was wrong. Money does not move a property line. A ribbon ceremony does not rewrite county records. And silence does not always mean surrender. Sometimes it means the owner is making copies. So tell me this, would you have tried to stop them at the first foundation, or let them finish after they ignored every warning? And if you have ever dealt with an HOA that acted as though its rules mattered more than your deed, tell me what happened in the comments. Remember this. When someone with a clipboard tells you that your property no longer belongs to you, don't raise your voice. Check the records, save every letter, and make copies, because fake authority gets loud when it is afraid of real paperwork.